The sound of a shattering glass froze everyone at the table. Then laughter broke out, not from amusement, but from disdain. Mother should write a book about how old people cling to money. Lucas said, his voice laced with alcohol and arrogance. The whole table erupted in laughter. Candlelight flickered across the faces of those who once shared her blood, now strangers with cold, greedy eyes. At 70 years old, Eleanor Hayes still held her posture straight, her deep blue dress wrapped around a thin yet elegant frame. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her wine-glass lips, forming a polite smile, but her eyes revealed the quiet wound no one bothered to see. What they didn't know was that within hours, the woman they mocked as a stingy keeper of wallets would become the storm that would shatter the world they lived in. Eleanor's 70th birthday dinner was held at a seaside restaurant in Vancouver, where golden lights glowed over a table adorned with white orchids and crystal glasses. She had chosen the place hoping to create a family memory, but her children's laughter turned it into a stage for manipulation. Lucas, the eldest, boasted about a real estate project that needed more funding. Clara, the artist daughter, spoke about her gallery that required sponsorship. Ethan, the youngest, cleverly mentioned a trust planning strategy to protect their mother's legacy. Every word came wrapped in affection, yet behind each one lingered the metallic scent of ambition. Eleanor remained silent. Only Lily, her 18-year-old granddaughter, sat quietly in the corner, watching her grandmother with worried eyes. The girl understood because she had overheard her mother and uncles whisper about the day they would take control of the company. Eleanor took a sip of wine. The bitterness spread across her tongue, stinging all the way to her heart. She had sacrificed everything for them, staying up nights drafting designs, selling her first home to save the company from collapse, working herself to exhaustion. She once believed that if she gave enough, love would return. But now, looking at the children she once held in her arms, she saw nothing but talking wallets. After Lucas's remark, laughter rippled again like a cold wave. Clara forced a smile and joked, "If you write that book, Mom, I'll design the cover." Ethan added, "We should call it The Art of Holding on Tight a Millionaire Mother's Guide." The laughter clattered dryly, hollow and cruel. Eleanor set down her glass, the diamond on her finger glinting under the light. She looked at each of them, her voice calm but sharp as steel. "You know," she said softly, "the person who truly holds the keys to the vault isn't the one who counts the money, but the one who knows when to close it." The table went silent. No one understood, thinking the old woman was simply musing about life. But Lily understood. Her eyes met her grandmother's, recognizing the quiet fire burning beneath that composed exterior. That night, when the party ended and the ocean wind scattered orchid petals across the floor, Eleanor stayed behind alone. She walked along the seawall, the breeze carrying salt and the sound of waves. Within those waves, she could still hear Lucas's voice echoing each word, slicing through her heart like a blade. Memories came rushing back, the husband she lost. Too soon, the 3 small children she raised alone, the first furniture workshop she built from nothing, the rough hands that once held pride instead of bitterness. She had believed that hard work and sacrifice would earn her children's love, but now that love was measured in shares and investment portfolios. Sitting on a stone bench, Eleanor reached into her handbag and took out a white envelope. Inside was her new will, thick and heavy, her name printed clearly across the top, Eleanor Hayes, Living Trust. She looked at the words for a long time, then smiled a cold smile of someone who no longer believed in gratitude. They had forgotten that she was the one who built the empire they were now living off, and now she was ready to reclaim every piece of it. Overhead, dark clouds gathered, swallowing the moon. The wind grew stronger, whipping her silver hair across her face. She stood gazing out toward the sea, her voice low but steady. If their love survives only through money, then it's time to let it die. The next morning, when the restaurant staff came to clean, they found wilted orchids on the table and a white envelope beneath a chair. Inside was a card that read, "Thank you for all the years that have passed. This dinner was my final gift." No one understood its meaning, but Eleanor did. The night before, amid her family's mocking laughter, she'd made her decision. From this moment on, not a single dollar of the Hayes fortune would be used to buy false affection again. She would stay silent, but the storm would not. And she, Eleanor Hayes, would be the one commanding it. Eleanor Hayes was born in the southern outskirts of Vancouver, where winters were long and pine forests stretched down to the foothills. In her youth, she believed in simple things: a warm home, a devoted husband, and 3 children growing up surrounded by laughter. But life broke its promise. At 35, she stood beside an overturned car on a mountain road where her husband Richard took his final breath. In the cold rain, Eleanor didn't cry. She went home, placed her 3 children before her, and said, "From now on, we'll build everything ourselves." The years that followed were sleepless and relentless. She sketched her first designs on the old dining table. Hayes' design was born in a small rented house with no capital, no staff, only the determination of a mother who refused to fall. Once her hands bled from sawing wood, but when a client praised her saying, "This room has soul," she felt every wound was worth it. The company grew, but as her work reached new heights, the family bond began to sink. When Lucas turned 18, she gave him his first car. He replied coldly, "I don't need a used car, you can keep it." That sentence made her realize that love, if not nurtured by gratitude, becomes distance. Clara, her second child, loved painting. Eleanor sent her to study in Toronto, paying every expense. When her first gallery failed, Clara only said, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't have let me end up in debt." That love was now measured in money. Ethan, the youngest, studied finance and graduated with honors. After opening his investment firm, he offered to manage his mother's assets so she wouldn't have to worry about paperwork. Eleanor understood it was a desire for control, yet she stayed silent. A mother's love endures even the pain caused by her own children. When the company reached its peak, Eleanor gradually handed over management to Lucas, trusting her eldest to carry on his father's legacy. But Lucas saw it as his birthright. Under his leadership, the company turned into a cold machine. "Mom, there's no room for emotions in business. Contracts don't need affection." Those words silenced her. The company thrived, but the family fell apart. Each morning she walked down the hallway lined with old photographs, 3 little children holding hands running on the beach, Richard embracing her at their first grand opening. Every frame felt like a blade, reminding her that the warmth of the past now existed only behind glass. She still believed that if she persevered, her children would understand. But years passed, and family dinners became rare. Whenever she asked to meet, their excuses were always the same. "The schedule's packed. We're finalizing a project. The kids have exams." Her 70th birthday was the first time they had sat together in nearly 5 years. She thought it was reconciliation, but it turned out to be a stage for deceit. When she returned to her seaside villa, Eleanor opened the door to silence. She removed the earrings Richard had given her and looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection staring back was a woman who had devoted her entire life to her children, only to be left with empty chairs. She remembered Richard's words before he died. "You can build anything, but don't forget that people matter more than structures." Now she understood it was people who had destroyed her greatest creation, the family. Eleanor opened a drawer and took out an old leather-bound notebook filled with 4 decades of expenses, written in neat lines. On the last page it said, "Everything for family." She crossed it out and wrote, "Everything for truth." Outside, the rain began to fall. Lily, her granddaughter, stood quietly by the door holding a small box. "Grandma Mom asked me to give you this," she said. Inside was an old family photo where everyone was genuinely smiling. Eleanor held the picture, her heart filled with both sorrow and resolve. "Do you know why I kept everything she asked?" Lily shook her head. "Because I once believed that if I gave enough, they'd love me back. But love that can be bought will always be sold cheap." "So what will you do now?" Lily asked softly. "I'll teach them the value of what they despise most, family." Eleanor placed the photo on the table, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the frame. Outside, thunder rolled and the wind grew fierce. Her face lit up in a flash of lightning calm, yet unyielding. "If they've forgotten where they came from," she said quietly, "I'll remind them in the only language they understand, money." Lily stepped back, realizing that in her grandmother's eyes there was no longer pain, only awakening. Eleanor looked toward the sea. The waves were rising and the sky was turning stormy. Inside her, another storm was forming, and this time she would be the one commanding it. The family vacation Eleanor planned was something she called the Week of Healing. She chose Salt Spring Island, where the sea was blue and wooden villas were hidden among pine forests. Every detail was arranged with care, private rooms for each family, menus tailored to everyone's preferences, and activities for the grandchildren. The total cost was nearly $40,000, but she didn't mind. Money can't buy love, but it can create a chance for it to return, she thought as she signed the transfer. When the ferry docked, Eleanor stood by the exit in a light white dress, her smile gentle. But that smile soon faded. Lucas appeared first with his wife and 2 children walking while talking on the phone. "Yes, I'll send the money tomorrow," he said, then turned to his mother. "Sorry, Mom, it's an urgent call." Clara arrived next, wearing sunglasses, giving her mother a brief hug before pulling out her camera to take pictures of the resort. "It's beautiful, but it must have cost a fortune, right?" "Mom," she asked, her tone half admiring, half probing. Ethan came last with his wife and son. He shook his mother's hand like a business partner. "Next time, let me handle the booking. I know the owner here. We could have gotten a discount." Eleanor smiled softly, hiding her disappointment. They hadn't come for her, but for the all-expenses-paid vacation. That evening, the whole family sat around the dinner table, facing the sea, the sunset painting the windows crimson. The meal passed in a polite, distant air. Lucas talked about the construction market, Clara about the art world, and the need for sponsors, Ethan about stocks and upcoming trends. No one asked how Eleanor had been. Trying to change the mood, she said, "How about a morning walk together tomorrow?" Lucas nodded absently. Clara gave a small laugh. "I have an interview in the morning," Ethan added. "Go ahead first. Mom, I'll catch up later." Their casual replies were light as air, yet each word pressed heavily on her heart. After dinner, Eleanor stepped out onto the balcony. The night breeze carried the scent of salt. In the distance, the laughter of her children and grandchildren echoed from the game room. Once that sound would have brought her joy. Now it only reminded her of the invisible distance between them. The next morning, she woke early and made coffee for everyone. But when she brought it out to the terrace, the table was empty. They had already left Lucas to meet a client, Clara to visit an art gallery, Ethan in an online meeting. Eleanor sat alone, 3 untouched cups of coffee cooling on the table. That afternoon, they returned, talking excitedly about their projects. Mom, Lucas said, "I'm planning an eco-resort. With a few $100,000 more in capital, the profit could double." Clara jumped in. "I've got an exhibition in Montreal. If I can open next month, it'll get nationwide coverage." Ethan smiled smoothly. "I could consolidate both projects into one family fund. It would be efficient and keep everything in-house." Eleanor listened quietly, feeling her heart grow colder. She realized the investment meeting had begun without her consent. That night, Lily came to sit beside her. "Grandma, why is everyone so busy? I thought this trip was for us to be together." Eleanor gently stroked her granddaughter's hair. "Because they've forgotten the value of silence and family. They think love only matters if it's profitable." On the third day, the resort hosted an outdoor party. Eleanor wore a floral dress, hoping to take a family photo, but Lucas was glued to his phone. Clara complained about the lighting, and Ethan laughed. Old-fashioned photos don't fit the family brand. In the end, only Lily took a single picture of her grandmother. In it, Eleanor smiled, but her eyes were empty. That night, when everyone was asleep, she walked down to the beach. The wind tossed her silver hair as waves crashed against the shore. She remembered Richard's words long ago. "Don't let money blur your humanity." But it was too late. The children she had raised with sweat and sleepless nights now spoke only in numbers. From her purse, she pulled out a small notebook and wrote, "Day 3. The family is here but does not exist." She closed it, her heart heavy with sadness but filled with resolve. On her way back to the villa, she saw Lucas in the hallway speaking quietly on the phone. His voice was low but clear. "If Mom agrees to invest, we can close the deal immediately. She's soft. You just have to nudge her at the right moment." Eleanor stood still, her heartbeat slow and cold. She turned away without letting him see her. In her eyes now glimmered something new, no longer sorrow but determination. The next morning, she prepared a lavish breakfast herself, baking fresh bread with her own hands. As everyone sat down, she smiled gently and said, "We still have a lot to talk about this week." No one noticed that behind that calm smile, Eleanor had already begun planning the most expensive lesson her family would ever learn. On the fourth evening on the island, Eleanor arranged a special dinner at a private seaside restaurant. She asked the staff to set a round table covered with a white cloth decorated with lavender and glass candles. "Tonight, I just want to talk about family," she instructed. When everyone arrived, soft light bathed their faces, but the warmth lasted only a few moments. Lucas sat at the far end of the table, his eyes fixed on his phone. Clara admired her wine glass, avoiding her mother's gaze. Ethan scrolled through documents on his tablet. Eleanor smiled and began, "Thank you for coming. I know you're all busy, but being here together means the world to me." Her voice was gentle and warm, yet no one responded. "How have you been, Mom?" Ethan asked out of courtesy. "I'm fine, just a little lonely," she replied. The silence that followed was heavy. Lucas broke it first. "I wanted to bring this up yesterday," he said. "I have a chance to collaborate with a major firm in Calgary. If you invest, the profits will double." Clara quickly added, "I also have an upcoming art exhibition in Montreal. If you help me fund it, my name will be featured in international magazines." Ethan smiled smoothly. "Actually, both projects could work together. I can create a family fund, you just need to provide the capital, and I'll manage everything." Eleanor looked around the table at her children's bright faces, glowing not from affection but ambition. Every word revolved around one thing: money. She lifted her glass, her tone still calm. "Tonight I only wanted to talk about family," Lucas replied. "But this is about family, Mom. It's a big opportunity." Clara gave a small laugh. "If you don't trust us, you can still keep control." Eleanor stayed silent. The sound of waves outside blended with the clinking of silverware. She looked at them, 3 grown children, successful but hollow of love, persuading her as if she were an investor. Finally, she spoke slowly. You know, after 70 years, I've learned one thing: no one is truly poor as long as they can still love. Her words made everyone pause. Then Lucas chuckled. That's just one of your old philosophies, Mom. These days, love doesn't survive without money. Ethan gave a nervous laugh. Mom, we just want to secure our future. If you help us, everyone benefits. Eleanor set her glass down. I thought we were talking about feelings, not profits. Her voice was soft but firm. Clara lowered her gaze. Lucas sighed. Mom, we don't mean any harm. We just want to grow what you and Dad built. What your father and I built isn't in the bank, Lucas, Eleanor said. It's in how you look at one another without calculation. The table fell silent. A gust of wind blew through, making the candles flicker. Eleanor stood her eyes steady. If one day I no longer had money, would you still want to be with me? The silence stretched. Lucas forced a smile. You'll always have money, Mom. Clara spoke quickly. Don't say things like that, Mom. We love you. Eleanor nodded and smiled sadly. Thank you. I just needed to know that. The rest of dinner unfolded awkwardly. When dessert was served, each of them found an excuse to leave the table. Alone among half-finished glasses of wine, Eleanor listened to the rhythmic sound of the waves, her heart filled with a chilling emptiness. She thought of Richard, the man who once told her, when you feel lonely in a crowd, it means you're in the wrong place. Now she understood. Back at the villa, she sat by the window watching the lights from the other rooms. The laughter of her children and grandchildren echoed faintly through the night. They were happy, as if the earlier conversation had never happened. She opened her small notebook and wrote a new line, Day 4, a silent heart at the dinner table. Lily entered and saw her staring out toward the sea. Grandma, did they make you sad again? Eleanor gently shook her head. No, my dear, they only helped me wake up. Lily sat down beside her, resting her head on her grandmother's shoulder. If I ever grow up and forget how to love, will you remind me? Eleanor smiled, her thin hand stroking Lily's hair. You won't forget. You know how to love with your heart, not your wallet. Outside, the waves crashed against the rocks, their deep rhythm echoing like the heartbeat of an old yet unbroken spirit. In the darkness, Eleanor knew one thing for certain. If they saw her only as a bank, then it was time for that bank to close. The next morning, the sky was clear and blue sunlight glimmering on the sea like thousands of tiny mirrors. Eleanor walked down to the resort lobby, her face calm, almost serene. She hadn't slept all night. The words from last evening's dinner kept echoing in her mind: investment profit, secure future. Now she understood she was no longer a mother, but a controllable investor. Lucas appeared first, phone in hand. I told you just sign it, my mom will agree, he said, then glanced up and forced a smile. Good morning, Mom. I'm just handling some business. Clara arrived next, dressed elegantly, holding a color palette. Mom, I got an offer for an exhibition in New York. If you help cover the costs, your name will be listed among the sponsors. Ethan came last, laptop in hand, his voice steady but polite. Mom, I've finished drafting the structure for the family fund. You just need to approve it. Eleanor didn't respond. She only looked at them quietly. Do you know why I chose this place, she asked. The three exchanged glances and shook their heads. Because your father once promised that when we grew old, we'd live here. He believed the sea reminds people of who they truly are. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. Now I see not everyone remembers that. Lucas changed the topic. Mom, the Calgary deal is a real opportunity. If you don't invest, someone else will. Clara chimed in. You just need to support me, Mom, and I'll make sure your name is featured on the sponsor board. Ethan smiled. This is about extending our legacy, Mom. Eleanor sat down, her hands tightening around the coffee cup. Do you know what I once was? Her tone was soft, but sharp. A woman who worked 18 hours a day carried debts after your father died, paid your tuition, bought our home, and made sure there was food on the table. I did it out of love, not to expect a return. Lucas sighed. Mom, things are different now. She replied firmly. No, only people are. She rose to her feet, her eyes as reflective as glass. If today I declared that I was selling everything and living simply, would you still stay by my side? The room went silent. Lucas looked away toward the window. Clara lowered her head. Ethan said nothing. Eleanor gave a faint smile. Thank you. Now I understand. She turned and walked away, leaving her children frozen in the blinding sunlight. At noon, she strolled along the beach with Lily. The girl held her grandmother's hand. Grandma, they said you're being stubborn. Eleanor chuckled. When people lose what they've always depended on, they call the one who takes it back stubborn. Her eyes softened as she looked out at the sea. When I was poor, they loved me. When I became wealthy, they loved my money. Perhaps only when everything is gone will they learn how to love people again. By afternoon, clouds gathered and the wind began to rise. Eleanor stood alone on the villa's balcony, her shawl fluttering in the gusts. From afar, she could hear Lucas and Ethan arguing while Clara locked herself in her room crying. Everything was breaking apart, yet for the first time, Eleanor felt at peace. That evening, the resort hosted a bonfire party. Eleanor sat apart with Lily, the sound of music blending with the smoke drifting through the night air. Lucas approached silent for a long moment before saying, Mom, I'm sorry about last night. I just wanted you to trust me. She looked at him, her expression kind but cold. I've trusted you all your life. Now it's time for me to trust myself. Clara came next, placing a glass of wine in front of her. Mom, maybe I was wrong. I don't want you to think I only care about money. Then what do you care about? Eleanor asked. Clara hesitated, her voice quiet. Maybe acceptance. Eleanor nodded. You can start again, but not with my wallet. Ethan came last, his tone weary. Mom, I miscalculated. The project is riskier than I thought. Maybe you were right, sometimes knowing when to stop is wisdom. Eleanor met his eyes. Wisdom isn't about stopping. It's about knowing for whom you stop. Ethan said nothing. The night deepened. The sea wind grew stronger and the flames of the bonfire faded to embers. Eleanor watched her 3 children, her heart filled with a mix of sorrow and clarity. Perhaps by morning they would return to their old ways, but at least tonight they were silent, and that silence meant more to her than any apology. When they returned to their rooms, Lily whispered, Grandma, are we leaving tomorrow? Eleanor caressed her cheek. Not yet, my dear. I still have one thing left to do. What is it? Lily asked. To give them a lesson life itself couldn't teach. Outside, the waves pounded harder against the shore. In the darkness, Eleanor knew that the dawn to come would not just mark another day, but the beginning of a storm she herself had summoned. The next morning, the resort was unusually quiet. The sky was pale and hazy, as if wrapped in a thin veil of mist, a sign that rain was coming. Eleanor sat on the balcony holding a steaming cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the distant sea. She had made up her mind today she would end this family vacation in a way no one could have imagined. No more tears, no more pretending, only the truth. When the family gathered in the lobby to prepare for the afternoon yacht trip, Eleanor appeared looking completely different. She wore a deep blue silk dress, a silver pin in her hair, her eyes calm but gleaming cold. Lucas whistled playfully. Mom trying to steal the spotlight today, Clara laughed. You look more elegant than the owner of this resort. Eleanor replied softly. Perhaps today I truly am the owner in a different sense. On the yacht, the sunlight was faint and the sea rippled gently. Everyone laughed, took photos, and sipped wine. while Eleanor quietly observed each face. Her children, their spouses, and her grandchildren, all of them enjoying the luxury she paid for. Every smile, every laugh had a price. As dinner began, she rose and tapped her glass lightly. "Before we end this vacation, I have something to say." Her voice was even and low, commanding silence across the table. "This week has given me time to think about our family, about love money and the value of gratitude." Lucas leaned forward. "Mom, I'm sorry if I upset you, but about the investment," Eleanor interrupted him. "No, tonight isn't about money. I just want to speak honestly." Clara's tone grew uneasy. "Mom, please don't make this a big scene." Eleanor smiled faintly. "My dear, sometimes making a scene is the only way people start to listen." She reached into her handbag and took out 3 white envelopes, placing one in front of each of her children. "Inside are summaries of what I've provided for each of you over the past 10 years. Tuition investments, house payments, and loans. I want you to know the total amount, nearly $3 million. Lucas froze. Clara's mouth fell open. Ethan frowned slightly, saying nothing. Eleanor continued, her tone sharp as steel. "I'm not blaming anyone, but starting today I will not spend another cent. I want to see how much love remains when my money is gone." The air shattered into silence. Clara burst into tears. "Mom, how can you be so cruel?" "I'm not cruel," Eleanor said calmly, gazing out at the sea. "I'm just being honest. All my life I've tried to make up for love with money, thinking I could buy it back. But real love doesn't have a price." Lucas slammed his hand on the table. "Mom, I don't need your money, but you can't just cut us off like this." "You just proved I can," she answered. Ethan stood, his voice rising. "If this is your way of teaching us a lesson, then you're doing it wrong." Eleanor looked straight at him. "It's not a lesson, it's liberation for all of us." No one said another word. Only the soft rush of waves and the faint fizz of champagne filled the silence. Suddenly, Lily ran over and took her grandmother's hand. "Grandma, why are they angry?" Eleanor bent down and whispered, "Because they haven't learned that loss can also be a lesson." The sky darkened. Light rain began to fall, the droplets melting on her skin like old tears. Eleanor stood at the yacht's railing, staring toward the dark horizon. "Richard, if you can see this, I hope you're proud," she murmured. Inside, Clara quietly left the table. Lucas made frantic phone calls, and Ethan sat still, silent as stone. When the yacht finally docked, Eleanor was the first to step off. She didn't look back. A staff member opened an umbrella for her, but she waved it away. "No need, a little rain won't hurt." That evening back at the villa, she gathered Thomas's old keepsakes, their wedding photo, his silver watch, and the blueprint of the first house they built together. She placed them carefully into a wooden box and wrote one word across the lid, "Freedom." Then she turned on her computer and sent an email to her lawyer. The message was short and clear. "See you tomorrow. Begin the asset transfer according to Plan B." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Lily came out and draped a shawl over her grandmother's shoulders. "Grandma, will they still come to visit you?" Eleanor brushed the girl's hair gently. "If they come back for me, the door will be open. But if they come back for money, it will stay locked forever." The girl rested her head on Eleanor's shoulder. "You'll still have me right." Eleanor smiled tenderly. "As long as you believe in love, my dear, I'll never be alone." Lightning flashed across the sky, reflecting in her wise, determined eyes. Eleanor knew the real storm was only just beginning, and this time she would be the one commanding it. The morning after the rain, the resort was eerily quiet. The sea was gray as steel, and the waves beat steadily like a weary heartbeat. Eleanor woke early, put on a wool coat, and walked down to the lobby. She had an appointment, and today everything would change. Mason Grant, her late husband's former advisor, was already waiting at the cafe. He stood when he saw her. "Mrs. Eleanor, I received your message. Do you really want to proceed with Plan B? Yes," she answered calmly. "I won't let my fortune fall into the hands of those who see me only as a wallet." Mason opened his briefcase and took out the draft of a new will. "I followed your instructions. The family trust will be frozen. Most of your assets will be transferred to the Independence Fund to support women and the elderly who've been abandoned, and your children's share. 1/10, Eleanor said slowly, "but only if they learn to love without asking." Mason nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "You're a strong woman." She exhaled softly. "No, just a mother who's exhausted." When Eleanor returned to the villa, her 3 children were already waiting. News of her meeting with the lawyer had spread like wildfire. Lucas stood first. "Mom, I heard you're changing your will." "Is it true every rumor holds a grain of truth?" she replied. Clara's voice trembled with anger. "Are you really planning to disinherit your own children?" Ethan stepped in, trying to sound calm. "Mom, we're family. Let's not turn this into a war." Eleanor set her glass on the table, her eyes sharp as blades. "Family Ethan. A family that only calls when they need money. A family that leaves their mother sitting alone in a hotel because they're afraid of hearing the truth." Lucas spoke quickly. "Mom, you've misunderstood. We didn't want to upset you." Eleanor gave a bitter laugh. "You've been taking my piece by piece, and now you're worried about my stress." Silence filled the room. Clara began to cry, dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. "Mom, I just want you to be happy." "If that's true," she said quietly, "then let me live my way." Ethan tried to hold himself together. "Mom, Dad wouldn't want this. Your father once said Eleanor replied that love can't be measured in money. If he were here, he'd sign the papers for me." The door closed behind them, and she sat alone, feeling hollow but free. There is no fear greater than pretending to be loved. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed. A message from Lucas read, "Mom, I need to see you alone. Not about money." She agreed. They met on the beach where the waves lapped at their feet. Lucas looked worn, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. He sat beside her silent at first, then said, "I read the letter you sent your lawyer." "I don't blame you. Maybe it's our fault too. We were raised with too much." Eleanor's voice softened. "I know. That's why I had to fix it." Lucas took a deep breath. "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a chance to prove I can be different. I want to start over." She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "If you truly mean that, then return to me the one debt you still owe." Lucas frowned. "What debt?" She smiled faintly. "Trust." When he left, Eleanor watched his silhouette fade into the mist, her heart filled with both sorrow and warmth. For the first time, she saw light in his eyes that wasn't reflected by wealth. As night fell, the ocean wind rose again. Eleanor opened the old wooden box containing Thomas's keepsakes. Inside, beside their wedding photo, was a note he had once written by hand. "When you are no longer loved as before, remember you don't need anyone else to know your worth." She smiled softly. "Thank you, Thomas. I finally understand." Outside, the waves moved steadily, like a heart beginning to beat again. In the far corner of the resort, Lucas stood on the phone, his voice low but firm. "I'm going to pay her back every cent, starting tomorrow." Meanwhile, Eleanor sat quietly in the dim light, feeling a stillness she hadn't known in years. For so long, she had lived trying to keep others close. Now she only needed to keep herself. And in that moment, she realized that the dawn to come would not bring fear, but freedom. The morning after the rain, the sea shimmered gray like polished steel, the waves soft and whispering against the shore. Eleanor woke early, slipped on her wool coat, and stepped onto the balcony. The damp, salty air turned her breath into mist. For a long moment she stood still, gazing out at the horizon, and a clear certainty settled within her. It was time to end everything in her own way. At breakfast, she received 3 messages from Clara, Ethan, and Lucas. Each said the same thing: "Mom, we need to talk. We need to make things right." Eleanor read them in silence, then took a slow sip of coffee. At last she murmured, "They want to talk, not demand." That afternoon, they gathered in a small conference room at the resort. The only things on the table were a glass pitcher of water and a single folder. Clara spoke first, her voice soft but steady. "Mom, maybe you were right. We've depended on you too much." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "But you never gave us a real chance to prove we could do things ourselves." Lucas added, "We're not good at showing it, but none of us ever wanted you to think we were taking advantage of you." Eleanor looked at them carefully, her voice calm and firm. "If that's true," she said, "then I want to see action, not promises. From this day forward, each of you must begin again with your own strength. No help from me, no inheritance, no shortcuts. When you've learned to stand on your own, that's when I'll know you've grown." Ethan hesitated. "And if we fail, then fail," she said gently. "Failure is the only way people discover they're truly alive." The room fell silent. The meeting ended without another word. Only Lucas stayed behind. He lingered for a moment, then said quietly, "Mom, I'm looking for a new business partner. No loans, no favors. I just want you to trust me." Eleanor nodded. "If your heart is sincere, then I'll trust you, but not with money." Later that afternoon, Clara knocked on her mother's door. She entered holding a sketch, the colors bright, yet soft. "I want to reopen the old art studio," she said. "Smaller this time, self-funded." Eleanor looked at the drawing, washed in shades of blue, and smiled. "You've painted from the heart," she said warmly. "That's what I've waited so long to see." Ethan arrived last, carrying his laptop. "Mom, I'm thinking of leaving my firm to start financial literacy classes for the elderly. I'm not asking for help, just your thoughts." Eleanor smiled proudly. "You don't need my opinion, Ethan. When you truly believe in what you're doing, others will believe too." That night, Eleanor walked along the beach. The wind was strong, the air sharp with salt and memory. For the first time in years, peace settled inside her like a tide returning home. Her children were beginning to stand on their own, late perhaps, but not too late. The next morning, the resort held a farewell brunch for the guests. Eleanor wore a simple white dress, her silver hair pinned neatly, no jewelry, no pretense. When she entered the hall, heads turned. Lucas and Clara were already there, and Ethan arrived moments later, holding a bouquet of white flowers. Lucas spoke first, his tone confident but gentle. "Mom, I canceled my old contract. I'm going to handle things on my own. Even if I lose everything, I won't go back to the way I was." Clara reached for her mother's hand. "I know I've disappointed you, but thank you for waking me up." Ethan offered the bouquet. "For you, Mom. Not to apologize, but to thank you for the lesson." Eleanor accepted the flowers, her expression soft yet dignified. "You don't need to apologize," she said quietly. "Just live honestly, and my heart will rest." The announcement for the airport shuttle echoed through the hall. Clara smiled faintly. "Mom, I hope next time we meet it's for love, not money." Eleanor returned her smile. "If that day comes, I'll be the one cooking breakfast." As the bus pulled away, her 3 children waved from the window, their faces bright and hopeful. Eleanor remained still, watching the sea shimmer under the sunlight, the breeze brushing her silver hair like a tender hand. In that moment, she understood what she had truly reclaimed was not wealth, but dignity. Sometimes to help others grow, you must let them lose what they've always taken for granted. That night, her last one at Hilton Bay, she sat by the window and opened her worn notebook. Slowly, she wrote, "Wealth isn't about having much, but knowing what's worth keeping. True love doesn't need guarantees, only honesty." She closed the notebook and looked out over the calm, moonlit sea. The reflection showed the silhouette of a woman who had walked through every storm without bowing her head. Eleanor closed her eyes, breathing deeply as the sound of the waves echoed softly against the shore. The tempests of her life had passed. Tomorrow morning she would return home, not to hide, not to run, but to begin again living a new life filled with peace, truth, and freedom. A week after returning home, Eleanor stood in her sunlit garden. The rose bushes Thomas had planted years ago were in full bloom, the scent drifting softly through the morning air. She bent down, cut a single rose, and placed it on the living room table, the same table that once held years of tension and silence, now surrounded by calm. That morning, she welcomed Mr. Mason Grant, her late husband's trusted advisor, and Patricia, her financial consultant. They arrived with a thick folder of documents. Mason smiled as he laid them out on the table. "Everything is completed," he said. "The Independence Fund will officially launch next week. You've decided to reserve 10% of your assets for your children, correct?" "Yes," Eleanor replied calmly, her tone steady, not out of resentment but fairness. "I want them to know that true worth comes from within, not from inheritance." Patricia smiled warmly. "You're becoming an inspiration for many women, Mrs. Butler. You're proving that strength and compassion can coexist." Eleanor shook her head gently. "No, Patricia. I'm not trying to inspire anyone. I just hope someone else won't have to learn the same lesson as late as I did." After the meeting, she sat by the window, the golden light spilling across the room. The house felt alive again, not from noise or wealth, but from peace. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Lucas appeared. "Mom, I just signed my first contract. No help, no loans, just me." Eleanor smiled softly, pride flickering in her eyes. She typed back, "Keep your word, Lucas. You promised me that." A few hours later, Clara called, her voice trembling but bright with excitement. "Mom, I'm organizing my first art exhibition. I didn't borrow a cent from anyone. I want you to come." Eleanor's smile widened. "Of course I'll come, my dear, but as a guest, not as a sponsor." Later, Ethan's email arrived, a long message filled with sincerity. "Mom, I've started financial literacy classes for the elderly. I understand now freedom doesn't mean avoiding responsibility. It means living without expecting others to carry it for you." Eleanor read his words twice, her chest tightening with emotion. A quiet, deep pride bloomed inside her. That evening, when the sun dipped low, Eleanor walked through her garden again. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of roses. Maria, her loyal housekeeper, appeared with a soft shawl and wrapped it gently around her shoulders. "You've seemed different since you came back from your trip," Maria said kindly. Eleanor smiled. "Maybe because I'm no longer afraid of being left behind." The moon cast silver light over the flowers. Maria Eleanor asked, her voice low, "Do you know why I created the Independence Fund?" "Because you're kind, Mrs. Butler," Maria replied. Eleanor shook her head. "No, because I know what it feels like to be forgotten, and I don't want anyone else to feel that kind of loneliness." The next week, the day of the fund's grand opening arrived. The event hall was filled with guests, business leaders, and local charities. Eleanor appeared in a tailored white suit. Her silver hair neatly pinned her posture graceful and strong. When she stepped onto the stage, applause thundered through the hall. She waited for the sound to fade, then began speaking, her voice calm but resonant. "I once believed that money could hold love together," she said. But I learned that love survives only where there is respect, and respect cannot be bought. The room grew silent, every word sinking deep. Then the applause came again, louder, longer, filled with admiration. At the back of the room, Lucas, Clara, and Ethan stood side by side, eyes glistening. For once, pride and understanding replaced guilt. After the ceremony, they approached her. Lucas was first. "Mom, I'm proud of you," he said quietly. Clara hugged her tightly, tears wetting Eleanor's shoulder. "Now I understand you didn't abandon us. You taught us how to stand tall." Ethan took his mother's hand gently. "Thank you, Mom, for being strong for all of us." Eleanor smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. "If you truly understand that now, then all the pain was worth it." When the guests had gone, Eleanor stayed behind, gazing at the foundation's emblem carved on the wall. Independence is the highest form of love. The gold letters shimmered under the light, reflecting her journey. That night, she opened her old leather-bound journal and wrote, "No one can truly love until they've learned to stand alone. I used to fear loneliness, but now I know loneliness only hurts when you forget who you are." A soft breeze flowed in through the window, carrying the fragrance of roses. Eleanor closed her journal and leaned back in her chair, her heart steady. Her life, after decades of sacrifice, had finally reached balance, not through money, but through dignity and peace. Her phone lit up once more. A message from Lily appeared. "Grandma, I miss you. When will you tell me more stories about Grandpa Thomas?" Eleanor smiled, typing back. "Tomorrow night, my sweet girl. I still have many stories to tell." In the soft glow of the lamp, she sat quietly, her face serene, yet full of vitality. Outside, the moon shimmered over the distant sea, as if reflecting the watchful eyes of her late husband. Eleanor Butler closed her eyes, the cool night air brushing her face. She knew that even if storms came again, she had already reclaimed life's greatest treasure, to be loved, not for what she owned, but for who she truly was. 2 months after the launch of the Independence Fund, Eleanor's life had completely changed. There were no more demanding phone calls, no more suffocating dinners. Every morning she tended to her garden, every afternoon she met with her advisory team, and every evening she read or wrote in her journal. For the first time in many years, she was living for herself and no one else. One morning, Lucas came to visit. He was dressed simply without gifts, holding only a folder of papers. "I don't want to bother you," he said, "but I think you should know that my project is finally profitable." Eleanor poured tea and smiled gently. "And how does it feel achieving success without my investment?" Lucas thought for a moment. "At first it was terrifying, but it turned out to be freedom. I failed several times, but each time I stood back up, I felt stronger." "Then you've learned the most important thing," she said softly. "Not how to make money, but how to live without needing anyone to rescue you." That afternoon, Clara stopped by carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. "Mom, my exhibition was a success. The local paper even wrote about it." Eleanor embraced her warmly. "So tell me, how does it feel to have built something on your own? It's hard, but it's happiness. I used to think you were harsh, but now I understand you just wanted us to stand on our own. And now that you understand that," Eleanor said with pride, "I can finally rest easy." The next day, Ethan called. He had just finished his first teaching session for a group of retirees. "Mom," he said quietly. Some of them cried when talking about being forgotten by their children. "I realized that I once treated you the same way." Eleanor was silent for a moment before replying, "Admitting your mistakes is the first step toward maturity. I forgave you long ago. I only hope you never forget the lesson." In the weeks that followed, her home was no longer empty. Her 3 children came by occasionally for dinner. No business deals, no contracts. They cooked together, shared stories, and laughed genuinely. Those evenings made Eleanor realize that when family love is free of money, it becomes truly authentic. One afternoon, Lily came to visit. She was taller now, her eyes bright with youth. "Grandma, I'm writing an essay about you," Lily said proudly. "The topic is, 'The Woman Who Taught Me the Meaning of Love.'" Eleanor chuckled. "Do you really think I deserve that?" "Of course," Lily said firmly. "You taught me that love isn't about giving without limits. It's about having the courage to set boundaries." Eleanor smiled and brushed a strand of hair from her granddaughter's face. "If you understand that, my dear, no one will ever be able to make you feel small." That night, Eleanor opened Thomas's old wooden box. Inside was their wedding photo and a faded note in his handwriting. "When you are no longer loved the way you once were, remember your worth has never been in anyone else's hands." She whispered, "Thomas, I finally understand." A week later, the Independence Fund held its first seminar. The conference room was small but filled to capacity. Eleanor stood at the podium, her silver hair glowing under the lights. "When you are forgotten," she said, her voice calm and strong, "you have two choices. One is to suffer in silence, and the other is to turn your pain into action. I chose action." When she finished, the entire room rose in applause. In the front row, Lucas, Clara, and Ethan sat speechless, their eyes wet with emotion. They realized that the woman standing before them was not just their mother, but a symbol of strength. That evening, the family gathered in the garden after the ceremony. The autumn breeze was cool, and fairy lights shimmered softly above. Lucas raised his glass. "Mom, I once hurt you deeply, but without you, I wouldn't have learned anything." Clara smiled through her tears. "I used to think you were cruel. Now I know you were brave." Ethan added, "You taught us how to love without dependence." Eleanor lifted her glass, her tone low and steady. "If you understand that now, then every storm we faced was worth it." The soft clinking of glasses echoed gently through the night. Lily sat beside her and whispered, "Grandma, are you happy now?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, because at last I get to be myself." "And have you forgiven them?" the girl asked. "Yes," Eleanor said quietly, "but more importantly, I've forgiven myself for once allowing them to forget what love truly means." The night wind rustled through the trees, and moonlight shimmered across her silver hair. Eleanor looked up at the star-filled sky, her heart light and steady. She no longer felt like someone left behind because now she had moved ahead, free, strong, and at peace. That winter, the wind whistled through the bare trees outside the Butler estate. Eleanor sat by the fireplace wrapped in a wool scarf, her hands cradling a cup of hot tea. Since the conference, the Independence Fund had grown faster than she ever imagined. Dozens of women and elderly people had found work housing and, most importantly, the courage to live again. Every thank you letter that arrived made her feel warmer in the middle of the cold season. One morning, Patricia, her financial advisor, came to visit. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said with a bright smile, "good news. The fund now qualifies for international sponsorship." "Do you want to expand abroad?" Eleanor smiled gently. "No, I want to keep it small. I don't need recognition or fame. I just want people to remember that everyone deserves respect." After Patricia left, Eleanor opened her journal. "Perhaps success isn't measured by scale," she wrote, "but by the hearts we touch. I once chased grand things, but now I know happiness lives in the simplest moments." That afternoon, Lucas arrived with his wife and 2 sons. The boys ran through the house, laughing, their voices filling it with life again. Lucas looked different, confident, calm. "Mom, I brought my quarterly report," he said proudly. "My company is now fully self-sufficient, and I've repaid every dollar you once lent me." Eleanor took the papers, her eyes soft and bright. "You never owed me anything, Lucas. I only hoped you'd never owe yourself." He smiled. "I think I've repaid both debts now." After they left, Clara came with several new paintings. "I'm donating these to the fund," she said. "They can be auctioned to raise scholarships for older women who want to learn new skills." Eleanor studied one of the paintings, a peaceful countryside landscape, the colors gentle and balanced, like Clara herself now. "You haven't just rediscovered your art," Eleanor said softly. "You've rediscovered yourself." Later that evening, Ethan arrived carrying a thick notebook. "Mom, I'm writing a book about ethical finance," he explained. "I want to include your story if you'll allow it." Eleanor laughed lightly. "My story only has one lesson: never trade love for convenience." Ethan smiled. "That's exactly why it should be told. People need to know that sometimes losing a mother's easy forgiveness is the best thing that can happen to them." Nights in the Butler house were no longer lonely. The rooms echoed with laughter music and the aroma of home-cooked meals. Maria, the loyal housekeeper, watched with a gentle smile. "You see, ma'am, the house feels warm again," she said. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, but this warmth comes from honesty, not from wealth." One night after everyone had left, Eleanor stepped outside into the garden. The ground was damp with frost, the wind cutting through the bare rose bushes. She stopped before Thomas's statue and whispered, "Do you see my love?" In the end, we won not through money, but through how we chose to live. The next morning, she received a handwritten letter from a woman named Nora, one of the fund's beneficiaries. "Mrs. Eleanor," it read, "thanks to your fund, I have a job and a home. But more importantly, I've learned to forgive my daughter. You didn't just change my life, you taught me how to love again." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she read. It was the kind of gratitude she had longed for her whole life, not from her own children, but from a stranger who truly understood her heart. That afternoon, Lily came to visit. She was 18 now, ready for college. "Grandma, I got a full scholarship," she said, jumping into Eleanor's arms. "I want to study psychology to help people who feel forgotten like you once did." Eleanor's eyes shimmered with pride. "You'll do better than I did, my dear, because you know how to love without paying the price for it." When Lily napped later, Eleanor sat by the window watching the snow fall outside. She thought about everything: the betrayals, the lonely dinners, and the moment she finally woke up to herself. Every piece of her past, even the painful ones, had been part of the journey that brought her peace. As night fell, the fire still burned in the hearth. Eleanor opened her journal and wrote her final entry for the year. "I used to fear winter," she wrote, "because it was cold and empty. But now I love it because only in the cold can we truly see who brings us warmth." Outside, the garden was blanketed in white. Inside, the woman who had once been left alone now sat in quiet contentment, a soft smile on her face. She knew that however many years remained, she had lived fully, not as someone who gave endlessly, but as someone who had finally learned to receive love that was real. The following spring, the rose bushes in the Butler garden bloomed earlier than ever before. Sunlight stretched across the stone path, glinting on Eleanor's aged yet steady hands. The Independence Fund had flourished beyond expectation, helping hundreds of women and seniors rediscover purpose and dignity. People now called her the Mother of Resilience. She smiled quietly whenever she heard it, not because of fame or recognition, but because those who had once been broken were now standing tall again. One bright morning, the doorbell rang. Maria opened the door to find Lucas, Clara, Ethan, and Lily stepping inside carrying flowers, pastries, and laughter. The house, once silent, filled with warmth. Lucas grinned and said, "Mom, today there are no contracts, no investments, no business talk, just family." Eleanor replied softly, "Good. I only have tea and bread to offer, but they're enough for those who know how to appreciate them." Around the table, the family gathered in harmony. Clara spoke first, sharing about her new project teaching painting to middle-aged women looking for confidence. Ethan discussed his community finance workshops and how they were helping the elderly regain financial control. Lucas described his latest plan to open a vocational center for disadvantaged youth. Eleanor listened carefully, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "You're doing exactly what I once dreamed of," she said, "helping others stand tall without needing anyone to hold them up." When lunch ended, Lily tugged her grandmother's hand. "Grandma, I have a surprise for you," she said, handing her a newspaper featuring a bold headline, "Eleanor Butler, the woman who turned pain into legacy." Eleanor read the article, folded the paper neatly, and smiled. "What do you think?" My dear Lily's voice was bright with admiration. "I think you're the bravest woman in the world." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Not brave, my love. I was just afraid of one thing, living long enough to regret staying silent." That afternoon, the family went out to the garden to plant trees together. The air smelled of earth and blooming roses. Clara placed her hands on the soil and said quietly, "Now I understand that freedom means doing what's right, even when no one else understands." Ethan added, "I've learned that love needs boundaries, or it turns into a burden." Lucas took his mother's hand gently. "And I've realized that true love isn't about receiving. It's about giving without expecting anything in return." Eleanor looked at her 3 grown children, her voice trembling as she spoke. "You've just said what I've been waiting my whole life to hear." Evening fell softly over the garden, the golden lights flickering among the flowers as the spring wind stirred the air. The family gathered again around the table outdoors. Lucas raised his glass. "Thank you, Mom, for teaching us to love without dependency." Clara smiled through tears. "Thank you for never giving up on us." Ethan's tone was tender and sincere. "Because of you, we've learned how to live kindly." Eleanor lifted her glass, her voice low and warm. "Thank you, my children. At last I am loved as a person, not as a purse." After dinner, as the laughter faded, Lily sat beside her grandmother. "Grandma, if one day you're not here anymore, can I continue your foundation?" Eleanor looked at her and nodded. "I believe you'll do it even better. But remember, don't do it for fame or praise. Do it because your heart tells you to, like you did." Lily asked with a smile, "No better than me." Eleanor replied softly, "I spent half my life learning that truth. You won't have to." When night came and the family had left, Eleanor remained alone in the garden. The scent of roses lingered in the gentle breeze. She opened her old journal, the final page still blank. Slowly she wrote, "I once believed that losing money was losing everything. Now I know the real tragedy is losing yourself." She added another line, "I have found myself again, not by giving endlessly, but by learning when to stop giving." Just then her phone rang. It was Mason, her longtime lawyer and friend. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said with excitement, "congratulations. The Independence Fund has been nominated for the National Humanitarian Award." Eleanor smiled softly. "If it wins, I'll dedicate it to everyone who has ever felt forgotten, including me." After the call, she stepped outside, looking up at the night sky. The stars glimmered above like Thomas's eyes from so many years ago. "Do you see my love?" she whispered. "At last, I've turned pain into light." The spring wind brushed past her face, carrying a single rose petal onto her shoulder. Eleanor closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the warmth of life all around her. Time might have been short, but she knew it was enough. She was no longer the lonely woman abandoned in a hotel lobby, but a woman who had rewritten her own ending with compassion, wisdom, and strength. The next morning, her speech was published in every major newspaper. The closing line moved millions to tears. Sometimes true love isn't about holding on tightly, but having the courage to let go so others can learn to return to you. At 75, Eleanor Butler closed the long journey of a mother once forgotten and became a symbol of dignity, grace, and kindness. Her story didn't end in sorrow, but in the golden light of dawn shining over the blooming roses, where a woman who had once fallen now sat quietly smiling in peace.